Welcome to the Simple Minds podcast, where we look to empower and encourage real conversation amongst men everywhere by unpacking topics on self-help, philosophy, and business. Just before we get started, guys, today's topic is a big one, and we talk a little bit about depression and mental health. If you need or feeling an immediate need that you need some help or assistance, please do something right now. You can call someone like Beyond Blue, and I'm sure there's others. I think their number's 1300 22 4636. Reach out to them or someone else. Just let someone know that you're struggling, and I'm sure someone will offer some help from there. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Conrad Francis here. Welcome to another episode of the Simple Minds podcast. I'm joined in the studio with Travis Hato.
Hey.
Justin Bourne.
Sup?
And I'm loath to introducing this bloke because he's seriously been wasting my time. Magic Matt Hannam.
Hi, Conrad. It's really nice to finally be on air with you.
Nice to be here, I think, Matt. Today we're drinking Four Pines Brewing Company's Indian Summer Ale. I love leaving my office. I've got a ton of wine there and I forget it every time, so I swing past the bottle. So this episode costs us more money than what it ever does.
What, four beers is the most you spent?
I bought fucking 6 of them.
Cheers. Cheers.
And I'm not sure I'm going to like this, but I'll drink it anyway. Indian Summer Ale.
Oh, it'd be nice if it was cold.
What do you mean? So
The can's cold.
Anyway.
I'm not sure about the middle.
It's not too bad. I've never had it before. What's that?
Very
Where's
IPA.
Where's Four Pines?
Isn't it local?
New South Wales.
Yeah. Local to Australia.
Australia. Oh, it's only 4,500 k's away. It's fine.
That's all right. I think I've spent a lot of time there this year, so I can call it local.
You have.
Gentlemen.
Crisp and light.
Yeah, ticks boxes.
In bitterness with aromas of passion fruit and honeydew.
I can actually taste the passion fruit, and I didn't even know that was in there.
Oh, you didn't say that before.
I didn't read the can either.
I didn't know that either.
All right.
Okay, on to serious matters.
The topic for today. It's a kind of quasi book review that was thrown at us by a mutual friend in a fauna?
I don't know. You're looking at me.
Trav, you gave us the friggin' note.
I don't know how to say it last name.
G'day, buddy. Anyway, you know who you are.
Thanks for
And if you don't, go look at your driver's license.
Thanks for the topic.
The book's called Lost Connections, Uncovering the Real Causes of Depression and the Unexpected Solutions. We're not going to proclaim to be the experts in depression here. That's what we're not going to do. But what we're going to, by reading the book and the summaries around the place, it does present some interesting alternatives to the traditional means of medicinal treatment of depression. The question was posed to me prior to coming in to this podcast: had I experienced depression? I would say that I probably have experienced depression. I did take into my own in my own hands and went and saw an expert on one occasion. It was interesting, and I think he cured me of my depression. But no, not really. I think we all bounce around depression without necessarily being diagnosed, nor are we getting necessarily treated for it. I think, Matt Hannam, you said you've experienced it in your past. I'm not sure about the other two gentlemen here. They're a bit younger, so they may not have hit that.
I personally haven't had any dealings with it to date.
Well, here's the interesting data, right, on this thing. Depression and the anxiety are now at epidemic levels. Why? Well, across the world, scientists have uncovered evidence for 9 different causes. Some are in our biology, but most are in the way we are living today. The book, Lost Connections, presents a radical new way of thinking about the crisis. It shows us, once we understand the real causes, we can begin to turn to pioneering new solutions, ones that offer real hope. Some of the data, evidence indicates men are far less likely to seek help for mental health conditions than women. The 2007 National Survey of Mental Health and Wellbeing Study found that the previous year only 27.5% of males with a mental disorder and recent symptoms had accessed services for mental health problems compared to 40.7% of females. 1 in 8 Australian men will experience depression in their lifetime. 12.2 of Australian males aged between 16 and 85 have experienced an affective disorder over their lifetime. That's equivalent to at least 1.15 million males today. And then the last part, men are less likely than females to experience depression and or anxiety. 12.2% of Australian males between 16 and 85 have experienced an affective disorder in their lifetime compared to 17.8% of females. 12.4%, and that's probably down to a recording and reporting perspective, right? Because men don't seek help. But 20.4% of Australian males between 16 and 85 have experienced an anxiety disorder in their lifetime compared to 32% of females. So the numbers are there and they're climbing. And I haven't touched on the suicide rates, which obviously are the extreme extension of anxiety and depression. The question posed by Ina, post reading the book, I'm guessing, Trav, was when people value money and material objects, does it fulfill your life with joy or happiness or create depression and anxiety? And it's an actual interesting scenario because I think there's one chapter in the book that actually talks about the externalization of extrinsic rewards as opposed to intrinsic rewards to help mitigate some of the issues around depression. Gentlemen, can I just bring you, I mean, we can go through the front part of the book, but I mean, that was all about the big pharmas and the Prozacs and the stuff they put on the table and the theory that some of that stuff clearly creates dependency and potentially could have some sort of placebo effect. So if we move past that, I want to get to the other 7.
Do you want to give us a quick 1-minute synopsis of the book?
I thought I just did.
Of the...
No, that was the weather report.
All right, well, give me a sec. I've got a 1-minute synopsis. Hey, that was the stats of the data.
Yeah.
The weather report.
All right, so the key message in the book was the pharmaceutical companies have been selling the public story that depression is caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. Research shows little evidence to support this claim. There are 9 main causes for depression, ranging from trauma and loneliness to disconnecting from meaningful values in nature. Happily, there are also 7 ways that we can heal ourselves, including acknowledging our disconnections and rethinking our values. Actionable advice, practice the sympathetic joy meditation, close your eyes and imagine something wonderful happening to you, for like falling in love. Let that joy flow over you. Next, imagine that the joy happening to someone you care for and let that joy flow over them. It's a process. So the book takes you through the seven processes that help you to reconnect with the things that you're disconnected from that potentially cause aspects of depression. So if we can go through those 7 and talk through those as to how we experience them, because I think we all do experience them in some way, shape or form in our lives, which is probably why we have a healthier balance in our life these days between the 4 of us in this room. And, you know, again, the conversation post this, and I welcome conversation from anybody listening to this with depression as to how other aspects, how their life will be challenged by what we put on the table today. Yeah? Yeah, fair enough, Trav?
Yeah, I think that's great.
Okay, so there are at least 9 common causes for depression. Thanks, Trav.
You're up.
Just some administration assistance here.
Let's
Conrad's got the microphone.
Before we go on this, I
one
want
side.
to bring another voice to the table, and I hate to do this, but Matt Hannum,
You hate to do it.
talk us through your diagnosis, mate. And let's then walk through some of these potential solutions and how these were present or not present in your situation.
That is a gigantic question.
Well, answer as succinctly as you can.
It's not that simple. It's not that simple at all.
So you were diagnosed at what age?
Well, I guess largely self-diagnosed.
But you were taking medication?
I briefly took some medication, maybe 6 months tops. I was probably 26, 27. And to rewind, I guess
I was about a similar age when I self-diagnosed.
Yeah. So to rewind, I worked in a fairly stressful accounting firm environment for probably 4 or 5 years, and I left to change jobs, which in a way was there was nothing particularly wrong at the time, but I left to switch jobs, and I was looking for a different opportunity, something that I found a little bit more meaningful. I got ill, and I had a cold, so I started this new job, and I had a bit of a cold, and it sort of progressed to. I haven't told this story for a long time, so it sort of progressed to being like very much the flu, and it was almost 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and I sort of took a couple of days off, which went against everything in every fibre in my being about taking days off when you've just started a new job and things like that. But I had to take a few days off, and I struggled through work, and I just didn't fully recover, and I went from being a 26-year-old healthy, fit young man that was active and doing a lot of things to being able to barely drag myself to the desk at work in the morning. And a lot of challenges came from that, but I guess it came from a distrust or a lack of faith in, I think, my physical body, and that progressed to some fairly significant anxiety, or full-blown anxiety disorder, to be fair, and I experienced patches of what I consider to be mild, but what I consider to be depression over the next couple of years, because this was 2 years worth of saying I was unwell.
Let me hold you there, because it's actually very interesting. I mean, Harari does say that there's 9 causes of depression, but there's 7 ways to reconnect. And one of the ways to reconnect, the first main cause of depression is a disconnect from meaningful work, so therefore a reconnect to work that's meaningful. So you said earlier on that, you were between jobs and you're looking for something that's more meaningful.
Well, I'd already made the move. So I think it was, if I was to analyze that piece of the equation, I think it was more the release or the changing of circumstance or significant change in vocation that helped form part of, I think, the illness, but it just continued on from there. I mean, I think I was put on antidepressants probably 12 months into that process at one point as something to try by a doctor. I found it very frustrating at the time, because I was trying to seek people to assist. I mean, I really had been diagnosed with chronic fatigue and a few other things sort of before it went to the point of saying, oh no, you've got depression, even though I feel like it's all very much related, or I felt like it was in my experience.
Well, how's this for a stat? From 2011 to 2012, only 13% of people described themselves as being engaged by their work. One of the most thorough studies to examine how our work affects our health was conducted by psychiatrist Michael Marmont in London in the 1970s. After studying 18,000 British civil servants, Marmont discovered it wasn't the bosses with big responsibilities who were more prone to heart attacks, but that those bosses were 4 times less likely than others to have a heart attack. To find out who experienced the most stress and depression, Marmont looked at people with the same pay level, status, and even the same office workspace. The results were clear. Those with less control and authority to make their own decisions were more likely to be depressed. Pretty fucking damning.
Oh, it's very damning. Yeah, look, it's sort of half a story there, I suppose, that I've shared. But the point is that it's. Well, I felt at the time, and this was probably 12 years ago, there was really difficult to find information and find a way to sort of help myself at the time. I think it's probably a little clearer now.
I don't think you weren't in any different spot than I was. I was I was at the end of a relationship. I was changing businesses. There was lots of upheaval. There was a lot of disconnection in my life. And you sit there and think, well, what the fuck are you living for? You're in that real dark space. Have you two got anything to add to that? Look at them, the two little friggin'.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm similar to Hato. I wouldn't say I've ever really experienced depression. I mean, there's been moments where I thought it was borderline, like maybe super mild, but it's very short-lived. And I've questioned, like, is this what depression feels like? So, it's really hard for me to comment on that aspect of it because I haven't lived it. I can definitely comment more on, I guess, because without trying to digress too much, one of the synopsis kind of put depression on one end of the scale and then being secure about yourself on the other. And I can definitely talk about my journey to becoming more secure, which is kind of that path to more self-acceptance and more self-love. So while I've never experienced depression, definitely gone through, I guess, my own journey of getting to self-love and self-acceptance, which I think is on the other end of spectrum of feeling secure about yourself. And some of the 7 things here I can definitely relate to as improving that over
the second
last
cause
couple of
is
years.
a disconnect from other people. Does it resonate with you, Matty?
You just cut him off. Yeah, sure. Yes and no. I felt like I was pretty disconnected. I certainly felt like no one knew or understood. I mean, I was very fortunate. So I wasn't married yet, but my
Are you in a
wife,
relationship or not?
yeah, my wife Tash and I, we were together. We were living together, and it was quite a heavy burden and challenge for her to manage for a 2-year period. And I didn't feel disconnected from her, but I think because of that and my disconnection with others, it meant she carried quite a heavy burden in that, and even in conversation. But I also carried a fairly heavy burden in that I just wouldn't and couldn't share what was. No, I'm talking even just about my physical state, like my genuine physical state at the lowest point during that. All mindset aside, even if I was feeling okay on a particular morning, I would literally drive to work, half an hour drive to work, park, walk to my desk, and have to sit there and pretty much recover for an hour and a half before I could even really physically try and start doing tasks, and more or less have to hide that in the process. Like that was the extent of my physical. I had to start walking laps of the oval across the road from my house. Like, I'll just do 1 lap today with my dog, and then I'll just do another lap and see if I can go a bit further tomorrow. I mean, that was the extent of where my physical condition was, all things aside. So, and most people I came across that I tried to share it with found a difficulty in understanding it and therefore connecting with it, and didn't really want to necessarily feel or hear that I was in that level of pain and struggle. So it was often fairly superficial in the response, not because they didn't care, but just because they didn't know how to manage. So it was like, just get on with it, or have a cup of tea, or whatever. This might solve these things. So
and then did that add to the frustration, because there was like kind
100%.
of no clear end outcome of what was actually going on?
100%. And I searched long and hard for information and like-minded people and ways that I could work myself into health. I see the reason why, and I'm not by any means educated here, but why I feel like I was mild in particular is that I never had contemplation of hurting myself or anything like that, other than what I was clearly doing to myself to an extent with my physical condition. So I've never I never had that or never got to that position. Even when I was in a really dark place, I always had hope and always had a direction. So yeah.
So just to further talk about this, the second cause being a disconnect from other people, I've got a few mates of mine going through challenging relationship situations at the moment, some separations, and some of the conversations are around loneliness and how real that is. And I guess I take it for granted because I'm fairly busy with what I do these days, but I do understand what that means. It's interesting because this chapter talks about loneliness. It's got here, loneliness can play a big role in feelings of stress and depression. Neuroscientist John Cacioppo showed how loneliness Cacioppo, I think it's how you say his name.
It is now.
Yep. How loneliness directly contributes to increased heart rates and high levels of stress-related hormone cortisol. In his studies during the 1990s, Cacioppo found that acute loneliness causes as much stress as being punched by a stranger. Both has happened to me. It's pretty, like I said, it's pretty interesting when you look at what some of this research shows.
I mean, just on loneliness as well, something that kind of came to even what you were just sharing with Matt is like you can still have people around you, but you can still feel extremely lonely.
100%.
Yeah, 100%.
And I like, you know, running business, I feel like there's moments of that where if you don't surround yourself with people, it can feel extremely lonely.
Having people around you versus serving other people, I think that's a very big key. I was very lucky. Like I said, to have basketball around me a large part of my last 10 years, and very distinct difference to me in my earlier life, and I probably also felt equally somewhat depressed in my teenage years. I really didn't feel like I had much to serve then, but you know, in the recent challenges in my life with relationships and the like in business, I've always felt like I've had something that I've been operating from a serving space with. So I think that adds value to the network you have around you. Potentially.
Look, I credit this period, which, you know, and this challenge that I've been in my life with my entire drive now. It's to me, the suffering that I went through that period was at such a depth. And I'm not going to debate levels of suffering for people. For me, it was extreme for, and during different levels for roughly about 2 years until I went to the point that I said, you know what, I think I'm okay now. Like, so it was physical, it was mental, psychological. I guess all these things were challenging me, but I now credit it for being the single best thing that's ever happened to me, and is probably the only reason that I have a drive.
Well, you've got more perspective from it at the moment. You're a few years off it, right? So you're looking back at it. I'm
over a decade off it.
So it's harder when you're in the eye of the storm, though.
It probably took me 3 to 5 years of feeling better to start to really truly feel the complete level of gratitude for having been through it. Because I have a level of awareness now that, and don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean I don't feel like even potentially mildly depressed or something like that at the time. You know, in the last decade, I'm not saying that I just had this period and then it just disappears, because I think we've got ways of doing things, or disconnecting and connecting with things, and finding a way to, you know, modify what's going on in our chemical states ourselves. Because it obviously is possible. We can influence these things. Medication can also influence, but as I said, it's taken me. It took me at least a few years to get my head around it, and then it's genuinely probably the core driver of why I do what I do, and it's still even one of the core drivers that changes my, you know, couple of degrees of orientation every time I feel like I'm slightly off course, because my challenge then is, well, hang on, I want to be impacting and helping other people, you know, whilst helping myself that are going through similar things. Am I doing that? And that's a question that comes back to front of mind very quickly, because it was a challenge. And I don't even necessarily, I can't think back and even fully experience where I was, because I was in such a haze of, you know, physical condition from what I'd done to myself, that a lot of it's a blur. And as you say, JB, I'd be in a room, but I wasn't really in the room with everyone.
Yeah, being present. Third cause of depression is a disconnect from meaningful values. And this is interesting. All being business owners in the room here, all have done some level of work on vision, mission, values stuff. To add value to what it is you're doing, to articulate what it is you're doing to your staff, your teams, your clients, yourself, while you get up in the morning and do what you do. I mean, I know this business that I've got now that has had more direction in that space and values, and the values are an extension of who I am, has done really, really well. Maybe it is coincidental or synchronistic. But how do you guys see values play out in your lives?
I think it's a really strong one to put it into a business sense. If you don't have values to speak to and to orientate yourself with, then you do become a bit of a shambles as a business. And, you know, personally, I can see that happening probably earlier on my years when I was 19, 20, 21. I didn't really have my set values in place that I really wanted to live my life by. And the way I treated people and the way I treated myself was definitely, look back on that. I don't regret that. However, I see that as a big learning, and that I can put down to a sort of not having my values set on how I want to be, treat other people, and so that crosses over to sort of every element, business, life, who you are. So,
well, Inna talks about, or Inna asked us the question about when people value money and material objects. This piece talks to, at the heart of the disconnect are two types of values, intrinsic and extrinsic. So if you play the piano for the delight it brings you, you're motivated by intrinsic value. If you play the piano solely for the money, then you're motivated by extrinsic value. So that's what we mean by intrinsic and extrinsic. Interestingly enough, psychologist Tim Cass conducted multiple studies showing how the more consumer-minded and extrinsic valued people are, the more depressed they become. Meanwhile, those focused on intrinsic goals such as helping others or becoming better musicians for the sheer joy of it saw a significant boost in their mood.
Well, this one's quite fascinating to me, particularly just with a few conversations recently. And I've got a friend who who is probably experiencing forms of anxiety and depression, even though everything from an outsider's point of view of his life is going really well, because he's tying not necessarily money, but his achievements to the opinions of others, and it's all extrinsic. And so every time he achieves something, he's feeling extremely unfulfilled because he's using others to validate that achievement, so it's not intrinsic. And so, it's really causing him a lot of mental challenges right now, because everything is seeking external validation. So it's not even just, it can be money. I think it can be like achievements as well, because it talks about here, what is the motivator as well? Like, be aware of your motivations and keep questioning where, you're spending your time and your money or what you're going after. And so even with some of the work that we've been exposed to recently, one of the biggest things that showed up for me was understanding your motivator, why you're doing what you're doing. Because even in myself, the first 2 years of business, I just wanted to hit $1 million revenue. And I share this story, and I literally, I hit it. And I just remember feeling completely like underwhelmed, unfulfilled, just like it probably was the closest thing I've had maybe to depression. I felt really shit, tired, exhausted. Like what was the point of all of this? Because it was just that milestone. And it was, it's then now, and I've been flipping it to work on service. And you talk about service, and the advice given, well, not advice, but suggestion was like, flipping to what are your intrinsic values or motivators to what you do.
Well, he says here, the key to reconnecting with meaningful values is to be aware of your motivations and keep questioning where you're spending your time and money. This will help you focus on what's truly meaningful to you. Tim Kasser, the psychologist we were talking about earlier, has taken his own research to heart by finding a peaceful 10 acres of land in Western Illinois where his family can focus on gardening, activism, volunteer work, and the things that enrich their lives. So he clearly took some of his own medicine. The fourth cause of depression is a disconnect from childhood trauma. This is a pretty interesting one, there's a lot of data in this chapter. But suffice to say that what a child defines as trauma is actually very interesting compared to the older you get and the different perspective you give yourself on some of this stuff too. So I'm not saying that childhood trauma isn't real. I'm just saying the distance you create from it and the opportunity you get to give yourself some perspective over it may give you or shed some light on top of it. And that's fair to say for some of the work we've all done in recent times. Anything to add to that, gentlemen? There's an example he talks about here in the 1980s where Dr. Vincent Folletti conducted a remarkable study on on obesity that showed how a disconnect from our past traumas could lead to depression Interestingly, Dr. Folletti didn't set out to make this connection. Instead, his study involves seeing if an extreme fasting diet could help a group of obese people to quickly and safely shed weight. At first, the results were impressive. One woman named Susan went from 408 pounds down to 132 pounds. But Folletti was surprised when Susan and others quickly put the weight back on, sensing there was something else was going on. Folletti began talking to the participants about their lives. He was shocked to discover that 55% of them had instances of sexual abuse in their past, and that it was immediately following these events that they began putting on weight. Susan started putting on weight after she'd been raped by her grandfather when she was 11. But why put on weight? As some participants put it, overweight is overlooked. That is, being larger made them feel protected from unwanted male attention. Folletti expanded his research to include 17,000 people in the San Diego area. The evidence also showed that more traumatic your childhood, the more likely you were to be depressed.
It does go on to say here towards the end, which is by acknowledging and talking about past trauma, people can reconnect with the troubling events in their lives and begin to move past them.
Yeah.
So that's really fascinating. And I find that really fascinating due to some of the other work that we've done and through some of the other instances where you've got to acknowledge what has happened and what's going on before you can truly move past it. So that's fascinating to me. Yeah,
I think that's what I was trying to touch on earlier, is that, if you revisit it now, the perspective you get should be different. And it might be instrumental in unlocking the reasons of why you're not feeling
definitely wouldn't
your best.
Be easy though. I'd say.
No, I don't think any of this stuff's easy. None of this stuff's easy. Even trying to figure out whether you're extrinsically motivated, is not easy. But again, what's the other side of not doing it or not putting in the work onto it is settling for what Big Pharma give you and creating a dependency on chemical adjustments to your brain. I don't know whether it's clearly not working. That's clearly not working. So maybe some hard work is necessary. And I think with the hard work you referenced, JB, it's probably hand in glove with the decline in resilience we've got going through society at the moment, because it is probably decidedly too hard work to do some of this stuff.
Yeah, are we looking for the easy fix a lot of the time?
Well, I think you're right. Like to my understanding of it, and this is open for. Please comment on this if you have a stronger connection with this. But to my understanding of it is that the medication is meant to serve as a bridge. And it's meant to serve you in that allows you then potentially some more time to work on some of these other factors which can help you. But to the best of my knowledge, I don't think people necessarily do that. So they don't do the work thereafter. So then they end up with an element of less effectiveness and or potentially a placebo nature, which then can only really go one way, which means take more of it. When it's not working, take more of it. And you'll never really achieve it. I found out after that largely what I was taking and the dose I was taking was effectively at a placebo type level, but it was so that's why I would consider what I did mild. But I'd already been working for a long time trying to find many different avenues and things that I could do to sort of, I guess, reconnect with everything. We did things like, I've got a dog, as little as that sounds, it's a massive thing. There's always this, this extra, another life in the house and someone that needs you to be responsible for them, and, worked on many different health factors. And I went down an Eastern path as well. I started doing acupuncture, scrubbing, many different forms, and talked to a lot of different people about a lot of different philosophies. And some of that stuff we talk about here on this podcast, and that's where I guess it started for me, because
I was going to say, what was the tipping point for you?
There was no help. As I said, I got sick, and then I went to the doctors, and they said, no, it's just like a flu, and then it just didn't go, and I just maintained being sick. 2 or 3 or 4 appointments for 3 to 7 minutes with my GP. Got me nowhere, so I had to start looking in other directions, and that's what it was.
What was the tipping point to make yourself the journey to become secure again, to secure yourself? or to, happiness?
There was no tipping point. I never didn't want that, so to speak, unless I'm not hearing the question right.
Highly likely, but we'll persist.
Well, explain the interpretation of the question.
There would be a tipping point. It's obviously whether it's magnitudinal or not. I mean, it's irrelevant. I mean, there'd be a reason why you chose to come out the other end.
Well, I always knew I would. That was my expectation. That was my hope, and I had faith. At times, it was darker than that in view, but I always still believed that I would move through the process. I don't think there's such a thing as a cure, or I think it's moved through the process. But no, I very quickly started to look for different things. I mean, I couldn't understand how no one around me, including I guess my GP or multiple GPs, I'd never experienced them not having the answer before, if you know what I mean. So I had to start looking for other things, and it wasn't as prolific as I'm sure it was prolific to an extent, and certainly in measuring back, but it wasn't as prolific as it is now. I mean, we weren't all talking about mindfulness and meditation, and there wasn't car maps, and there wasn't this stuff wasn't.
It's isolated, man.
I had to go dig out, and some random guy somewhere would give me a CD for a mindfulness
CD, a cassette.
No, mate, I'm not 104.
What's that?
But you know what I mean. Like that stuff wasn't.
Yeah, you're right.
It wasn't available. Like, or I didn't know where to find it.
The kids these days have got everything on their fucking phones, man. I'm absolutely fucking seriously jealous.
It's all free on your phone. That was not
they're the
there.
most fucking soft-minded.
I had to go visit some kooky dude in like some random suburb somewhere and line up out the front of his house to like have an appointment for stuff.
Was it Conrad?
It wasn't Conrad. It wasn't Conrad.
Hang on,
but true. Like this is sort of stuff I did because I was searching for anything that could give me another percent better or closer.
Let me tell you what you should have watched, all right? Because
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
The fifth cause of depression is a disconnect from status and respect, and the sixth is also a disconnection from nature. There's a great piece on here about observing baboons and bonobos, which I think you should be watching a David Attenborough documentary on Matty Hannum. You might find some answers there, but this is probably why Travis Haydo's not fucking depressed, mate.
Because he's a genuine tree.
He looks like a ranger.
And he's a tree.
People study baboons, bonobos and orangutans, but more importantly, the part I want to talk about is a lady by the name of Isabel Benchke. In her 20s, she studied the nature of human beings. It witnessed how bonobos in the wild cope with stress when they stop grooming and sit apart from each other. So he stopped grooming a long time ago, mate. So when they stop grooming and sit apart from each other, it's clear that they're depressed. But when they're taken away from nature, things get much worse. They'll scratch their head till they bleed, howl, rock back and forth. Nature is so important to us. Studies show that people in greener neighbourhoods experience less stress and despair, while immersion in nature reduces obsessive thoughts and boosts concentration. So, and again, the way we live and the way we work, we're not setting ourselves up for a good crack at it, right?
And those are the types of things that I did. And there isn't one or even three or five.
Bonobos.
No, I
don't even know what a bonobo is.
I went to the beach every day, and I went and I started walking, and then I started running again a little bit on the beach, like whatever it was. But I just did every little bit that I could. Every opportunity that I had the energy to do, I did something like that. There's many things, but all of it is just a reconnection with, a reconnection, right? I mean, that just in general, that word is reconnection with a lot of things.
I'm a firm believer in energy, as you guys would probably know, and obviously
Red Bulls and stuff, or
Earth energy, and I think that point has a lot of. It's a very valid point because the earth is all energy, and that's where I feel that I get my energy from. So if I'm ever sapping of energy and need to reconnect or go back to myself, first thing is go not hug a tree, but I go and make sure I take my shoes off. I can feel the grass. I can in amongst the trees. I think for me, it's a very powerful, energetic exercise that I do. And I understand, like, if someone lived in a basement of a skyscraper in New York.
Oh, but I mean, even in just the skyscraper itself, mate. I said to someone the other day, when you go out into a balcony, like, I don't mind apartment living. I can see it. I don't live in one, but I can see myself living in an apartment one day. However, the caveat I got over that is I've got to be able to see the sky. When you're looking at somebody else's fucking balcony with their dirty washing on there, it does fuck all for you.
Unless there's cute little G-strings. Just joking.
Where does one take that?
I'm getting depressed. The seventh cause of depression is a disconnection from a hopeful and secure future. This is another interesting, and this book is amazing because the statistical research that's presented in each of these chapters is absolutely mind-blowing. And I'm not doing it any justice because we're not going through all of it. But there's a piece in this chapter which talks about, I'll just read it to you. In 1973, the Manitoba town of Dauphin was home to an experiment that provided people with an automatic minimum wage equal to $19,000 a year in today's money. It was cancelled in 1979 by a new Conservative government that was displeased with the concept, though 1,800 boxes of data on this experiment still exist. The data shows that in just 3 years there was a 9% drop in people seeking medical help for mood disorders. People who lived there at the time remember how the money acted as an insurance policy for a farming town whose fate rested largely on canola crops. Once the automatic wages arrived, inhabitants worried less about their children's futures and can use the money to access the education they otherwise wouldn't have been able to afford. In other words, the automatic minimum wage helped people reconnect with their sense of the future and meaningful work. These studies are pretty damning. I mean, how the hell?
What's scary about the meaningful work piece is how much I think now.
I work for a lot less than $19,000 a year, let's be honest.
No, well, forget the money bit, but I think the challenge that we have now is there's such a high bar for what's considered meaningful work.
But is that the problem? I think that comes down to the extrinsic or intrinsic motivating factors,
exactly.
Right?
So I think it is a problem because, and we've heard about this, like Coach Wooden sweeping floors or whatever, we see, I think the current sort of couple of generations or the bottom half of the workforce at this point in time is has very lofty, Instagram like style goals and what good quality work is. And I think sometimes they don't necessarily have gratitude and see the value in any and all tasks, and having that ability to flip it round on yourself and just be like, no, I'm going to do whatever I'm doing and enjoy that to the best of and I can move in another direction if I want, but I'm going to enjoy the work and make it meaningful. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges we've got, because how is this going to do or be anything other than get worse?
Well, I get it, mate. I know people that are janitors or people that clean up rubbish for a living that love what they friggin' well do. So it is, and we'll probably talk about it in future episodes, I think we've always talked it in past episodes. It's how you see the problems of the world or the issues in the world. If you change the way you look at something, what you look at changes.
Who are you quoting?
Dave Clare.
I think it was Errol.
It's not Errol either.
No, it's not
Errol either, but Errol did say it. Gentlemen, I'm just mindful of time. I want to get through these last few episodes, these last few pieces, because they're really important.
I think just before you go on that, and similarly again, I think we've shared on this as well, but what you just shared through that experiment, when you've got your finances under control, the mental kind of freedom that you feel and the anxiety that you don't feel is paramount. And I think, when you're stressed about where you're going to pay that next bill or this or that, and a lot of people overextend themselves for external motivators, I think that's one of the biggest things a lot of people could
take a long, hard look at.
Yeah.
Well, Conrad, you must see a lot of that within your finance.
I see a ton of it, mate. Yeah, 100%.
And surely that would be a big contributor to quite a few people.
For sure.
And sorry to cut you off, but
that's all right. I did a JB, so
yeah, no. But to add to that, before you answer, like this whole notion of credit cards and the way we operate with plastic and extra levels of debt, like what we constructed for ourselves in the earlier part of this century was this industrial revolution, which put people in a state of employment, which allowed them to have a stable, consistent paycheck, which to allow them to just go and focus on work without having to have those concerns. We've now moved into this shift where consumer debt is rife.
Yeah,
and that's changed because all of a sudden these people aren't just running their process.
Mate, I'll quote Jocko, mate. Discipline creates freedom. Now, did the credit card create the consumer debt? No. Humans created the debt. It's how we use everything in this world, mate. It's not the things themselves.
Well, neither it's good. Actually, the notion of being employed is something that I don't enjoy myself.
Well, but it serves some people, right? I mean, some people are very, very competent followers. And, mate, to have the businesses we have, we need people like that. And I don't fundamentally have a problem with it. Yeah, I'd love them to take the ownership that I have, but they don't take the risk that I take. But yeah, let's not get confused here. Nothing in this world that's been developed and created or innovated is designed to impact us negatively. We make that choice. The second last chapter talks about the gene changes in the brain, and again, I mean, I'm no expert in this, but I mean, I will talk to the statistics that's talked about here. So the title's called Genes and Changes in the Brain are the Final Cause of Depression, but their influence is limited. And I think that's the interesting piece here. Research shows that the genes account for 37% of cases of depression. To put that into perspective, height is 90% determined by your genes, while that percentage drops to zero when it comes to determining your language. So genetics play a relatively small role when it comes to the causes of depression. That to me is a very interesting scenario because a lot of things I've heard about depression, and my grandmother has struggled with depression and prior to her death did struggle a lot with depression, and I was scared that it was genetic, and I was wondering whether it would show up in my mum or in myself or my sisters, or my sister, my brother.
It's a massive problem in older people. Like it's a huge problem.
Yeah,
it's not just it's a problem at many levels, but it's a big problem in older people.
The other fascinating thing it actually goes on to say here, which supports a lot of the other work that we've talked about, is that where your focus goes, your energy flows, right? So it goes here likewise. If you spend more time engaged in thoughts of fear and despair rather than joy and pleasure, the areas associated with positive feelings will weaken, while the ones associated with negative feelings will strengthen. So that kind of your focus becomes your reality, which is super fascinating. That's touched on here as well, which is a common thread that we've talked about in the past and we'll probably continue to talk about in the future.
A couple of the other things, I mean, just to wrap it up, a couple of other things I talk about, and something that's really, really interesting to me is social prescribing is a solution that connects people with one another and to meaningful work. And again, there's some great examples here talking about Dr. Everington. The first through something called social prescribing. This is by the time she met Dr. Everington, Lisa had quit her job as a nurse in a London hospital. After complaining that her fellow nurses were mistreating the patients in the psychiatric ward, Lisa's co-workers turned on her, making her job unbearable. Having grown up in a household where she'd been aggressively picked on, she could take being bullied at work. She couldn't take being bullied at work. So one day she just stopped showing up. Around this time, Lisa started taking Prozac, which made her gain weight. For the next 7 years, she proceeded to feel horrible about herself and only left the house to buy junk food. Then one day she worked up the courage to follow her doctor's advice and visit East London's clinic run by Dr. Sam Etherington. Instead of prescribing more drugs, Etherington gave Lisa a social prescription, which involved working with a small group of disconnected people to turn an abandoned piece of London wasteland into a healthy garden. Things started out tentatively, with people being a little guarded about one another, but they all agreed to take on the challenge and together learned the basics of gardening, how to fix up an abandoned lot. In doing so, they opened up to one another and saw that they had a lot in common. Lisa would never have guessed that she had a similar life to that of an elderly Asian man, yet he too had been bullied at work. There was great satisfaction from getting the garden to bloom and receiving thanks from people in the neighbourhood. Eventually, Lisa came off Prozac, dropped 62 pounds and moved to Wales to open her own gardening centre. But all this would never have happened had she not received the social prescription from Dr. Everington. Again, another powerful story. And again, like I've said, this whole book is very, very well researched to substantiate the cause and effects outside of the chemical treatment of depression. Gents, I mean, we're not trying to say that I'm not trying to say that there isn't a place for chemicals or chemical uses in the treatment of depression. I'm just saying that this book provides a lot of evidence for other ways of treating the same issue. And I'm not sure whether one or the other, exclusive to each other, are right or wrong. But I'd like people to either pick up the book and have a look at it, jump online and listen to the shorts if you don't like reading a book. But if you are or know someone that's struggling with depression, there's a lot of cases in here that they may want to listen to.
I think it's, I mean, you haven't touched on the last piece, which is probably pretty powerful too, the other recommendation of sympathetic joy.
Psychedelics and stuff, yeah, go for it.
And even psychedelics and the meditation, which is that, practicing meditation through experiencing the feelings of joy, whether it's about yourself, for yourself or for others, and then projecting that outwards. I've been doing the Calm app on and off for a few years. They've got a couple of them, I think, in the gratitude or love piece where they take you through a couple of these examples. I think even Deepak and Oprah's relationships one probably goes on a similar experience. And yeah, it's funny that psychedelic drugs come up. There's a lot of talk about that recently.
Psilocybin is one that they talk about a lot in the treatment of mental health issues.
Yeah, and I mean, just to echo off what you're saying, Conrad, I mean,
psilocybin, sorry. I
haven't experienced depression, but I know a lot of people do. And some of the stuff in here, I think regardless, there are some great things just to improve life.
Yeah, just improve life. You don't have to have depression to do some of this stuff.
Happier life and feel more secure and work towards more self-love and self-acceptance. It's quite fascinating.
So to answer Inna, I don't necessarily think that people valuing money or material objects is necessarily in conflict with their joy and happiness, but I can see how it can be.
Agreed.
Yeah, the challenge with that is, it's the value systems, right? So they're only chasing money, material things because that's what they feel like they should be doing, and it's potentially part of the polarity, which is then causing the the lack of happiness. But how
do you deem success?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's so then a big piece of it comes down to the vision. What is your vision? What does your life look like? What do you want it to look like? Creating those steps. And I think what's the scary thing about this for me is, and having had some experience, is there's a lot of work, and it's a lot easier to start by. It's pretty easy to start taking medication. It's a lot of hard work to start to make some serious adjustments, like is recommended in this book.
Yeah, but this is just structure, right? And what do we know? Structure over chaos creates order, and I think
the challenge is patience. In what I wanted to put out there is the challenge is patience, because there's lots of little things like. It can be a quicker win to start taking medication. And I'm not saying either is right or wrong, and I'm saying both. Both is really where you would want to go if you're in trouble. In particular, if you are in trouble, then obviously reach out to people and get some immediate help. But if you're just in an okay place, you can start to make little improvements every day.
Agreed. Thanks, people.
And I should add, based off the first stat, is definitely reach out. People will, anyone, most people will be willing to listen, to learn. Take the first step. If you're feeling anything, please reach out. Particularly men who feel like they can do it on their own. I think it's all too common as blokes that we feel like we can get through it and, I'll just deal with it. But the power of just someone that you feel comfortable with, just going, hey, I need help. That first, again, coming back to the effort, that first step will then cascade into many other steps, and you'll realize that probably a lot of other people around you have gone through something similar, and or if not, they know people to be able to help. So take that first initial step, please.
Cool. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. I think we just sign off now. We don't have to say anything.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Simple Minds podcast. If you like our show and want to know more, then check out our website at simplemindspodcast.com. If you like, you can even leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or share this episode with a friend. The Simple Minds podcast is also on Facebook, Insta, and for those that like to keep things formal, LinkedIn. So follow us there if you want to keep up with the latest updates from the show. See you next week.